6:47 a.m. Tuesday morning. I'm drinking coffee in my kitchen when I hear the sound that's haunted my nightmares for 3 months straight, the deliberate crunch of metal meeting concrete. Through my window, I watch Victoria Sterling back her pristine white Escalade away from the twisted wreckage of Mailbox number 7. But this time, she's made a critical mistake. This time, I've been recording everything. And this time, she's about to discover that when you mess with someone who designs explosions for Marvel movies, the only thing that blows up is your entire world. The mangled remains of what used to be my regulation HOA-approved mailbox are scattered across the sidewalk like the aftermath of a small tornado. Pieces of twisted aluminum catch the morning sunlight, creating a crime scene that looks almost artistic in its destruction. 7 mailboxes in 3 months, each one destroyed at exactly 6:47 a.m., each one replaced by me with growing frustration and mounting expense. But Victoria Sterling has no idea that this morning marks the beginning of the end of her little reign of suburban terror. Before I tell you how a Hollywood effects designer turned a suburban nightmare into the most satisfying revenge story you'll hear this year, I need to know something. Have you ever dealt with that one neighbor who thinks owning a clipboard makes them the neighborhood dictator? Someone who weaponizes homeowner association rules like they're commanding a small army? Because trust me, after you hear what Victoria Sterling put me through, you're going to want to share your own stories about the tyrants hiding behind HOA badges. And if you've ever fantasized about the perfect comeback against a power-hungry Karen, well, you're about to witness a masterclass in patience. Engineering. An absolutely devastating payback. My name is Marcus Thompson, and 3 months ago, I inherited my Uncle Mike's house in what seemed like the perfect suburban neighborhood, Maple Ridge Estates, where every lawn is exactly 2 3/4 inches tall. Every mailbox stands at precisely 42 inches high. And every resident lives in blissful conformity under the watchful eye of the most controlling homeowner association this side of a military compound. I moved here from Los Angeles, where I spend my days creating practical effects for Marvel Studios. You know those explosions that look devastatingly real but don't actually hurt anyone? Those collapsing buildings that crumble perfectly on cue? That's my world. I design disasters for a living, and I'm very, very good at it. Uncle Mike's house came with everything I needed to escape the chaos of Hollywood: a quiet street, friendly neighbors, and most importantly, a massive garage that I could convert into the perfect workshop. Within 2 weeks, I had it set up with all my equipment, precision tools, metal fabrication gear, and enough engineering supplies to build practically anything. The garage became my sanctuary, where I could work on freelance projects and maintain my sanity between the demanding schedules of blockbuster movie productions. For the first month, life in Maple Ridge Estates felt like paradise. My neighbors seemed genuinely friendly. Eleanor Walsh, the retired teacher who lives next door, brought me homemade cookies and shared stories about Uncle Mike's legendary barbecue parties. The young couple across the street, Sarah and David Chen, waved enthusiastically whenever they saw me working in the garage. Even Paul Mitchell, who I learned was the HOA vice president, seemed like a decent guy when he stopped by to introduce himself and welcome me to the neighborhood. Everything changed the day Victoria Sterling decided I needed to be taught a lesson about community standards. It started innocently enough with what appeared to be a simple accident. I was in my workshop, fine-tuning a breakaway wall panel for an upcoming Marvel project, when I heard the unmistakable sound of impact outside. By the time I reached my front window, a white Escalade was disappearing around the corner, and my brand new mailbox lay crumpled on the sidewalk like a discarded soda can. I figured it was just one of those things that happen in suburbia. Maybe someone was texting while driving. Perhaps a teenager was out joyriding. These incidents occur, right? I spent that afternoon at the hardware store, purchased a replacement, and installed it myself. No big deal. I even made sure to follow every single HOA regulation about placement, height, and color. The thing was a perfect example of suburban compliance. Victoria's first visit came exactly 30 minutes after I finished the installation. She appeared at my door wearing an expression of practiced concern and a shiny gold badge that read HOA President pinned to her immaculate blazer like she was the sheriff of suburbia. Victoria Sterling was the kind of woman who looked like she had stepped out of a real estate magazine. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes, and a smile that somehow managed to be both welcoming and calculating at the same time. Oh my goodness. Marcus, she said, her voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. I heard about your mailbox incident. What a terrible accident. She peered around me, trying to get a glimpse inside my house with the casual nosiness of someone accustomed to boundary violations. I hope you're not too shaken up. We've never had anything like this happen in our neighborhood before. It's so unusual. The way she emphasized unusual made it sound like I had personally invited chaos into their perfect little world. She asked about my work schedule with the persistence of someone conducting an interrogation. Did I work from home? How often did I have clients visiting? Were there any renovation plans in the works? We just want to ensure new residents understand our community standards, she explained with that plastic smile that never quite reached her eyes. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Same time, exactly 6:47 a.m. Same angle of impact. Same twisted metal aftermath scattered across my lawn. I was starting to see a pattern, but I told myself it had to be coincidence. Maybe someone had a personal grudge against Uncle Mike that I was inheriting by association. Perhaps there was a drunk driver who took the same route home from a bar every couple of weeks. This time, I decided to take precautions. I replaced the mailbox and installed a small security camera pointed toward the street. Nothing fancy, just a basic setup designed to catch whoever was doing this. When Victoria made her second visit, she came armed with more questions and significantly less fake sympathy. I see you've installed surveillance equipment, she noted, studying my camera with obvious disapproval. Did you get permission from the HOA board for that? Privacy is very important in our community, and we need to ensure any monitoring devices comply with our regulations. When I pointed out that the camera was positioned on my own property and aimed only at public areas, she nodded slowly like she was filing that information away for future use. Of course. We all want to feel secure. Just remember that any external modifications require approval, and cameras can create privacy concerns for neighbors. She handed me a thick booklet that looked like it had been written by lawyers who charged by the word. The HOA regulations were a masterpiece of bureaucratic language designed to give the board unlimited power over residents' lives. Grass couldn't exceed 3 inches in height. Paint colors had to be approved from a pre-selected palette of neutral tones. No unauthorized signage. No modifications without written permission. No activities that might disturb the peaceful enjoyment of others. The third mailbox met its doom on a crisp October morning. And this time I was ready. I positioned myself at my bedroom window with coffee and my phone, watching the street like a detective on a stakeout. At exactly 6:47 a.m., the white Escalade approached with the precision of a guided missile. Victoria slowed just enough to line up her shot, then accelerated straight into my mailbox with the confidence of someone who had done this before. The impact sent metal fragments flying across my lawn in a spectacular display of deliberate destruction. But this time, I captured everything. Crystal clear footage of Victoria Sterling, HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood dictator, systematically destroying my property with the precision of someone who had practiced this routine multiple times. I spent that morning reviewing the security footage and taking detailed notes. The pattern was undeniable and damning. Every other Tuesday. Same time. Same methodical targeting. This wasn't random vandalism or drunk driving accidents. This was personal. Systematic harassment disguised as coincidence. But why would someone I barely knew wage this kind of campaign against me? The answer came during Victoria's third sympathy visit. When I watched her examine the wreckage with the enthusiasm of an art critic studying a masterpiece, she took photographs from multiple angles for what she claimed were HOA incident reports. But her body language told a different story. This woman was enjoying herself. You know, Marcus, she said, circling the destroyed mailbox like a predator marking territory. These accidents seem to happen only to your property, never anyone else's. Maybe you should consider relocating the mailbox to a safer position. When I pointed out that the mailbox had been in exactly the same location for 15 years without incident under Uncle Mike's ownership, Victoria just shrugged with calculated indifference. Sometimes change brings unforeseen consequences. New residents often need time to adapt to established neighborhood dynamics. That evening, Eleanor Walsh knocked on my door with a plate of cookies and a worried expression. "Honey, can we talk privately?" she asked, glancing around nervously. "There are some things about Victoria Sterling you need to know." We sat in my kitchen while Eleanor shared stories that made my blood run cold. Victoria had a pattern, a system for dealing with residents who didn't immediately fall in line with her vision of perfect suburban compliance. She would start with small provocations, minor violations, friendly suggestions, subtle pressure. If that didn't work, she escalated to systematic harassment designed to make staying in the neighborhood financially impossible. She's forced 3 families to sell their homes in the past 2 years, Eleanor explained, her voice barely above a whisper. The Johnsons, the Martinez family, and those sweet young people with the twin babies. She finds violations everywhere, stacks up fines until people can't afford to fight back anymore. Eleanor showed me her own collection of violation notices, 18 of them for increasingly ridiculous infractions. Grass, allegedly a quarter-inch too tall. Garden flowers, supposedly non-compliant species. Her American flag displayed at the wrong angle, according to some obscure regulation Victoria had discovered in the depths of the HOA handbook. She targets anyone who shows independence or questions her authority. Eleanor continued, pulling out a folder thick with documentation. New residents get tested first. If you immediately submit to her control, she leaves you alone. If you show any backbone whatsoever, she destroys you systematically until selling becomes your only option. The pieces started falling into place with terrifying clarity. During our first conversation, Victoria had asked if I was single, mentioned a coffee shop she liked, and suggested we get to know each other better. I had politely declined, explaining that I was focused on work and getting settled. Her smile had flickered for just a moment before returning to full brightness. But that moment had been enough. I had failed Victoria Sterling's submission test, and now I was paying the price. The next morning brought my first official violation notice, delivered by Paul Mitchell with an expression of genuine embarrassment. The yellow paper cited me for excessive grass height. Apparently my lawn measured 3 1/8 inches instead of the regulation 3-inch maximum. The fine was $75, payable within 48 hours. I measured every blade of grass in my yard that evening and found it was exactly the same height as every other lawn on the street. When I walked around the neighborhood taking comparison photos, I noticed Victoria watching me from her window, probably planning her next move in this bizarre game of suburban chess. The violation notices started arriving like clockwork after that. Every Tuesday morning, Paul would appear at my door with his clipboard, an increasingly apologetic demeanor, posting another yellow paper while Victoria supervised from her Escalade parked across the street. It was psychological warfare disguised as municipal bureaucracy, and they had refined it to a science. By the end of week 2, my front door looked like a crime scene bulletin board. 5 violation notices in 3 days. Unauthorized paint color, despite using the exact same white as 6 other houses on my block. Aggressive parking posture. My car parked legally in my own driveway, exactly where Uncle Mike had parked his for 15 years. Excessive noise during permitted hours, because I had used power tools in my garage workshop during the clearly designated time frame for such activities. The psychological pressure was remarkable in its efficiency. Every morning became a ritual of checking my front door to see if new yellow notices had appeared overnight, like some bureaucratic version of scarlet letters marking me as a community outcast. Neighbors started avoiding eye contact when they walked past. I'm probably grateful they weren't in Victoria's crosshairs, but afraid that showing me any support might make them the next target. Victoria's surveillance escalated to military levels. She drove past my house 6 times per day, slowing down to photograph any changes to my property. She documented my visitors, my delivery schedules, even the times I took out my garbage. Eleanor slipped me notes with updates on Victoria's behavior. She was treating my house like a target for intelligence gathering, building a comprehensive file of my daily routines. The violations became increasingly creative and vindictive. Vehicle positioning creates sightline obstruction for pedestrian safety. $200 because my car allegedly blocked some imaginary walkway. Improper storage of construction materials. $300 for keeping legitimate workshop supplies in my own garage. Failure to maintain community aesthetic standards. $500 for what Victoria claimed was an unauthorized outdoor decoration, which was actually Uncle Mike's small memorial wind chime hanging from the porch. Each violation came with escalating fines and shorter deadlines for payment. Victoria was accelerating her timeline, probably sensing that I was planning some kind of resistance and wanting to crush me financially before I could mount any defense. The woman had elevated HOA tyranny to an art form, and she was clearly proud of her systematic destruction system. But Victoria Sterling had made one critical miscalculation. She had no idea she was threatening someone who spent his days building traps for movie villains. Someone who understood exactly how to make things look harmless while being devastatingly effective. And as I sat in my workshop that night, surrounded by the tools and materials of my trade, staring at the growing pile of violation notices, I realized something that made me smile for the first time in weeks. In Hollywood, we don't just build things that break apart safely for stunts. Sometimes, we build things that look fragile but are strong enough to survive explosions. And Victoria Sterling was about to discover that when you declare war on someone who designs disasters for a living, you better be prepared for the kind of spectacular failure that becomes legendary. The memorial garden was about to become ground zero for the most satisfying revenge story this neighborhood had ever witnessed. Uncle Mike's memorial garden was more than landscaping, it was love made visible. Every spring for 15 years, he had tended those roses with the patience of someone who understood that beautiful things take time to grow. The garden wrapped around the side of the house in gentle curves, with stepping stones he had laid by hand and a small wooden bench where he used to sit every evening, watching the sunset paint the flowers in golden light. After his cancer diagnosis, that garden became his final project, his way of leaving something beautiful behind for whoever came next. Victoria destroyed it on a Thursday morning in November with the methodical precision of someone dismantling evidence. I watched from my kitchen window as she arrived with Paul trailing behind her, both carrying measuring devices and clipboards like they were conducting some kind of official survey. But instead of measuring property lines, Victoria walked straight into the garden, wearing her most businesslike expression, and began systematically trampling through the flower beds. This wasn't accidental damage from careless inspection. Victoria ground antique rose bushes into the mud with her designer heels, scattered the memorial stones Uncle Mike had placed to mark significant dates, and crushed bulbs that had survived Michigan winters for over a decade. She worked with deliberate efficiency, while Paul documented alleged violations, transforming 15 years of careful cultivation into a wasteland of broken stems and scattered petals. When I ran outside to confront them, Victoria looked up from the destruction with that same plastic smile she had worn during our first meeting. "Oh, Marcus, we're just conducting the mandatory inspection mentioned in your latest violation notice. These plantings clearly exceed the permitted setback distance, which creates serious safety concerns for emergency vehicles." She gestured at the crushed roses like they were hazardous waste. "I know it's disappointing, but regulations exist for everyone's protection. We can't make exceptions based on sentimental attachments." The casual cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. She was destroying 15 years of love and memory while lecturing me about community safety. I knelt among the ruined flowers, my hands shaking with rage as I picked up pieces of broken memorial stones. That night, I sat alone in Uncle Mike's favorite spot, staring at the devastation and seriously considering defeat for the first time. But Eleanor appeared at my fence line the next morning with something that changed everything. A manila folder thick with documents and an expression of grim determination. "Honey, I've been keeping records on Victoria for 2 years, waiting for someone brave enough to fight back. After what she did yesterday, I think it's time you knew exactly who you're dealing with." The folder contained financial documents Paul had secretly copied, property records Eleanor had researched, and correspondence that revealed Victoria's true motivation. She wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president, she was running a sophisticated real estate manipulation scheme. Victoria had been systematically targeting properties for harassment, forcing owners to sell below market value, then purchasing through shell companies and flipping for massive profits. My house wasn't random collateral damage in some suburban power trip. It was a carefully selected target worth potentially $500,000 in commission fees. Victoria represented a mysterious buyer who wanted to purchase Uncle Mike's property as the centerpiece of a larger development project. The entire harassment campaign had been designed to pressure me into selling quickly and cheaply. "She's done this to 12 families in 3 different neighborhoods," Eleanor explained, showing me copies of similar violation campaigns. The Martinez family, the Johnsons, the young couple with twins, they all received the same treatment. Escalating fines, impossible deadlines, systematic destruction of anything that brought them joy, until selling became their only financial option. But Victoria had made one critical miscalculation in her research. She had no idea that the quiet guy who inherited Uncle Mike's house spent his days designing practical effects for Marvel Studios. She didn't know that I specialized in creating things that looked ordinary but could withstand extraordinary forces. And she certainly didn't realize that destroying Uncle Mike's memorial garden had just transformed a defensive victim into someone with both the skills and motivation to build the perfect trap. That weekend, I began designing what would become known throughout Maple Ridge Estates as the Fortress Mailbox. Using contacts from Marvel's prop department, I acquired industrial-grade materials that most suburban homeowners would never dream of accessing. The foundation required serious engineering, 4 feet of steel-reinforced concrete designed to anchor something much heavier than a typical mailbox. I worked in sections during Victoria's predictable absence periods, disguising the construction as routine landscaping repairs. The mailbox itself looked absolutely regulation-compliant from the outside. Is standard aluminum construction. Approved height. Perfect suburban aesthetics. But inside that innocent exterior was a solid steel core, anchored to my concrete foundation with enough structural integrity to stop a full-size truck. The entire assembly was designed to absorb massive impact without showing even surface scratches. I installed a comprehensive camera system with multiple angles and wireless transmission to back up storage locations. This wasn't just about protecting my property anymore. This was about documenting the systematic destruction of a community bully and ensuring that Victoria's reign of suburban terror ended permanently. The psychological pressure reached nuclear levels during construction week. Victoria's surveillance escalated to hourly drive-bys, and new violations appeared daily with increasingly desperate creativity. Unauthorized construction debris. Excessive tool usage during restricted hours. Suspected unpermitted modifications. Each notice came with escalating fines and threats of immediate foreclosure if payment wasn't received within 24 hours. But Paul started providing intelligence about Victoria's timeline and growing desperation. Her buyer had established a deadline, and her commission depended on closing the deal before Christmas. The financial pressure was making her reckless, pushing violations that even her compliant HOA board members were starting to question. By Friday night, the trap was set. My Fortress mailbox stood at exactly the regulation height, painted in approved colors, positioned precisely where Uncle Mike's had been for 15 years. From the street, it looked like the perfect example of HOA compliance. Only I knew what lay beneath that deceptive exterior. Monday morning, 6:47 a.m. I positioned myself at my bedroom window with coffee in one hand and my phone recording in the other, watching the quiet street that was about to become the site of Victoria Sterling's spectacular downfall. Eleanor was stationed at her window with her own recording device, and even Sarah Chen across the street had been alerted to witness this moment of suburban justice. The white Escalade appeared right on schedule, approaching with the confidence of someone who had executed this routine dozens of times before. Victoria slowed to line up her approach, then accelerated toward my mailbox, with 25 miles per hour of suburban fury and absolute certainty that this would be mailbox number 8 in her campaign of systematic destruction. The collision was a masterpiece of physics meeting engineering. Victoria's Escalade hit my Fortress mailbox with enough force to demolish any normal installation. But instead of the usual crushing satisfaction of twisted metal, she got something completely different. The impact transformed her vehicle into an accordion of crumpled steel and exploding safety systems while my mailbox didn't even wobble. The hood folded instantly. Steam erupted from the destroyed radiator, and airbags exploded throughout the passenger compartment. The collision drove the engine block backward into the firewall, transforming Victoria's weapon of neighborhood terrorism into a smoking monument to overconfidence and poor decision-making. Glass scattered across the asphalt like confetti celebrating the end of her reign. Victoria sat motionless behind her deployed airbag, staring through her shattered windshield at my mailbox with an expression of pure disbelief. The Fortress stood pristine and unmarked, gleaming in the morning sunlight like it was posing for a victory photograph. Within minutes, neighbors emerged from houses throughout the street, phones in hand, documenting the scene. People who had been terrorized into silence for years suddenly felt brave enough to witness Victoria's meltdown firsthand. Eleanor's recording was already uploading to social media, and the hashtag #MailboxRevenge started trending locally within the first hour. This is impossible. Victoria stammered as she struggled out of her destroyed vehicle. This mailbox is illegal. You set me up. This is entrapment. Actually, Victoria, it's just really well built. I replied calmly, still recording as she stood among the wreckage of her intimidation campaign. I used proper engineering principles and quality materials. You know, actual standards. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Multiple camera angles showing deliberate targeting, systematic property destruction, and now the spectacular consequences of Victoria's own actions. Her insurance company denied the claim within hours, and by evening, Paul had delivered his resignation from the HOA board, along with copies of all the financial documents proving Victoria's fraud scheme. 3 weeks later, Victoria's house went on the market. The criminal investigation was moving forward. Her real estate license was suspended, and the community she had terrorized was finally free to breathe again. Eleanor was elected as the new HOA president, and her first official act was revoking every violation notice Victoria had issued in the past 3 years. The transformation was immediate and profound. Sarah Chen finally felt safe letting her toddler play in their front yard without fear of noise complaints. The Martinez family, who had been forced to move away, actually came back to visit and thanked me personally for ending Victoria's reign. Paul started a neighborhood support group for previous victims, helping them file civil lawsuits and recover damages from their forced relocations. Word spread beyond Maple Ridge Estates. I began receiving calls from other neighborhoods dealing with their own HOA tyrants, asking for consultation on defensive architecture and engineering solutions. My story inspired a movement of resistance against suburban authoritarianism, with communities across 3 states requesting blueprints for their own fortress mailboxes. Local news stations picked up the story, running segments about HOA abuse and community resistance. The video footage became a viral sensation, generating millions of views and sparking nationwide conversations about homeowner association reform. Victoria's spectacular failure became a cautionary tale taught in law schools about the dangers of unchecked bureaucratic power. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Victoria pled guilty to fraud charges and was ordered to pay restitution to all her victims. The settlement fund totaled over $2 million, finally providing justice for families who had lost their homes to her schemes. Marvel Studios even offered me a promotion after the story, demonstrated my problem-solving creativity under pressure, turning my suburban nightmare into an unexpected career boost. 6 months later, I was working in my rebuilt memorial garden when a young family with 2 children knocked on my door. They had just moved into Victoria's former house and wanted to meet the neighborhood legend, who had liberated their new community from suburban tyranny. Their kids immediately gravitated toward the fortress mailbox, asking technical questions about construction methods and impact resistance. That mailbox still stands today, gleaming in the morning sun like a monument to the power of patience, engineering, and perfectly executed justice. Children asked their parents about the famous mailbox that fought back, and new residents specifically request tours of the engineering marvel that ended a tyrant's reign. Every time I see families walking safely down our peaceful street, families who will never have to fear a power-hungry tyrant with a clipboard and a grudge, I remember Uncle Mike's favorite saying, "You don't build things to break. Son, you build them to last." Well, Uncle Mike, your nephew built something that's going to last forever.